The morning after I buried my husband, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at his empty chair and trying to steady my hands. The house felt quieter than ever, as if even the walls were grieving with me. I told myself the worst part of my weekend was over. I thought my son would come by with kindness, maybe a little comfort, maybe a warm word. Instead, when he walked in, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before: coldness. If you're watching this, please like the video, subscribe, and tell me from where you are watching today. When I came home after the funeral, my body felt heavier than it ever had in my life. My legs were tired, my back ached, and my chest hurt in a way no medicine could reach. I moved through the house on autopilot, putting down my purse, hanging my black coat on the hook, seeing my husband's shoes still lined up by the door. I looked at the armchair where he used to sit, and the mug he always used, still in its usual place. Every little thing reminded me he was gone, but I told myself that pain was normal. That was grief, not cruelty. Grief is expected. I made myself some tea because that is what you do when you do not know what else to do. I sat at the dining table where we had eaten breakfast together for so many years. I stared at the empty chair across from me and felt the ache grow, but I tried to stay calm. I reminded myself that I still had my son, I still had family, I still had some kind of support. I believed my son would step in to help me through the loneliness, the paperwork, and the long nights. I truly trusted that part. I thought the worst part of the weekend was over. The funeral was behind us. The guests had gone home. The flowers were still fresh. I assumed the next few days would be about rest, phone calls from relatives, and small, quiet moments of remembering. I did not think about money. I did not think about accounts. I did not think about control. I was in that state where you are simply trying to breathe. I knew there were things to handle later: insurance, bank accounts, bills, and legal documents. My husband and I had prepared for all of that long before his health declined. He was organized, careful, and protective. I knew where everything was. I knew who to call. I knew what needed to be done. But I also knew it did not have to be done the very next day. There was time. There should have been compassion first, then business. The morning after the funeral, I sat at the same table with my tea, feeling tired, but a little steady. I told myself I would go through the files next week, maybe after I slept properly for a few nights. I thought I had some peace before dealing with the practical side of loss. When I heard my son's car outside, I felt a small wave of relief. I told myself he must be coming to check on me, to make sure I ate, to see if I needed help with anything. I expected a hug, maybe some tears, maybe shared memories about his father. I expected warmth, even if it was quiet. I did not expect what walked through my front door. He stepped inside, but he did not look around like a son coming into his childhood home. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not look at his father's chair. His eyes were different, harder, colder, busy. He moved like a man with a task, not like a man visiting his grieving mother. I felt a strange chill in my stomach, but tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just shock, just his way of dealing with loss. I tried to believe grief would be the only challenge I faced that weekend. I tried to believe that, for a little while at least, I was still safe in my own home. I did not know that grief was about to become the smallest part of my pain. From the moment my son walked in, something felt wrong. He did not move toward me. He did not sit down. He did not place a hand on my shoulder or ask if I had eaten. He glanced at me for a second, almost like I was a stranger in his way, and then he walked past me into the living room. His shoes were loud on the floor. His presence felt like a weight instead of comfort. He started looking around the house, not like someone remembering childhood memories, but like someone checking a space he planned to control. He opened cabinet doors without asking. He picked up envelopes from the side table and flipped them over to read the names. He walked into my bedroom and looked at the dresser, the nightstand, and the drawer where I kept important letters. It was not gentle or curious. It was fast and sharp, like he was searching for something specific. I followed him slowly, confused and uneasy. In my mind, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. I told myself maybe he was worried about bills, or maybe he thought he was helping by sorting paperwork. I wanted to think the best. After all, he was my son. A mother's heart does not turn against her child easily, even when the signs are right in front of her. He walked into my small home office and looked straight at the shelf where I kept folders labeled with years and account types. He did not ask if he could look. He simply pulled one out, opened it, and scanned the pages. Bank statements, insurance letters, retirement documents. He went through them with a kind of cold focus that did not match the softness this moment needed. He asked short, sharp questions about which bank I used, where my pension went, how much life insurance his father had, whether the house was paid off. There was no kindness in his voice. It sounded like a financial interview, not a check-in on his mother's well-being. I answered simply, still believing he wanted to help manage things after the shock. But with each question, my stomach tightened a little more. He did not ask if I was sleeping. He did not ask if I was scared. He did not ask if I needed a friend to sit with me. He only asked about money. He moved from room to room, checking drawers, opening closets, glancing under piles of papers. He moved his eyes over every document he could see. When he passed the framed photos of his father and me from younger years, he barely glanced at them. His focus was not on memories. It was on assets. I sat down in the living room chair and watched him move, feeling smaller and smaller as the minutes went by. The house that once felt like a place of safety suddenly felt like a space being evaluated. I felt more like an old piece of furniture than a person. The hardest part was not what he did. It was what he didn't do. He did not show grief. He did not show tenderness. He did not even seem tired. He seemed determined. It was like he had come not to visit, but to inspect. The funeral pamphlets were still on the table. The flowers from the service were still in vases by the window. My husband had been in the ground less than 24 hours. Yet in that same window of time, my son was walking around my home like a man checking what would change hands. I realized slowly that he hadn't come to see how I was doing. He'd come to see what I had. The moment that understanding settled on me, something inside me cracked. Not completely, not loudly, but in a slow, deep way that I knew I would feel for the rest of my life. I had lost my husband on Friday, and on Saturday, I began to lose my son. The moment that changed everything came without warning. There was no build-up, no argument, no raised voice. It happened in seconds, but it told me more about my son than all his years of growing up under my roof. He walked back into the dining room where I was sitting, and instead of joining me, he reached for my purse on the chair. He opened it like it was his own. He pulled out my wallet, opened it, and began removing my bank cards one by one. He did not ask for them. He did not explain. He did not even look embarrassed. He simply slid them into his own pocket like it was natural. Then he walked to the small drawer where I kept my checkbook and pulled it out too. He took my ID folder, the one I kept near my seat for convenience, and placed it with the rest. His movements were quick and decisive, like he had already planned this step. I watched all of this in shock. My body felt frozen. I wanted to say something, but for a moment, no sound came out. My mind raced, trying to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. This was my child, the one I had fed, clothed, comforted, and protected. The one my husband had worked long hours for. The one we thought would be our support in old age. He was not supporting me. He was stripping me. He gathered my cards, my checkbook, and a folder of account papers he had pulled from my office, and he stood there with them in his hands, looking down at me with a face I barely recognized. There was no softness in his eyes, only power, only control, only a sense of victory, as if he had just taken an important step in a plan. He made it clear with his words and his expression that he had decided my good life was over and that he would be the one in charge from now on. There was no kindness in the way he framed it. It was not an offer to help. It was a takeover. He saw my age, my grief, and my recent loss as weaknesses he could use, not pains he should protect. In that instant, something inside me woke up. The shock cleared just enough for a sharper thought to come through. He truly believed that by taking those cards and papers, he now had all the power. He believed everything my husband and I had built belonged to him next. He believed I was too broken to push back. But there was one thing he did not know. My husband and I had prepared for this possibility. We had seen stories like this. Older parents stripped of everything by their own children or relatives once one partner died. My husband was a practical man. When his health began to fail, he insisted we create protections, extra accounts, backup wills, legal structures, and safety nets that no one else knew about. The accounts my son thought he was seizing were not the only ones. The folder he grabbed did not hold the full picture. The cards he took were not the keys to my entire life. There were other layers he had never seen, other names he had never heard, other documents he did not know existed. He thought he was ending my security. In reality, he was only revealing himself. And while he believed he was acting alone, making bold moves without consequence, he did not realize something else was happening at the exact same time. Someone else was watching, not just me. Not just my memory. There was another set of eyes on him, eyes he did not know were there, eyes that would become very important later. His slip was not just in what he took, it was in what he assumed. He assumed I was helpless. He assumed I was alone. He assumed wrong. As I sat there watching my son scoop up my cards and papers like prizes, my mind traveled back to the years when my husband and I quietly prepared for the future. We were not always comfortable. When we were younger, money was tight. We worked long hours, cut coupons, and stretched meals. But over time, through discipline and steady work, our situation changed. My husband learned more about saving, investing, and planning. He was not rich, but he was careful. He believed in safety, not show. We never lived a flashy life. Our house was modest. Our car was simple. Our vacations were small and planned in advance. To the outside world, we looked like any ordinary older couple living off a pension and savings. Even our son believed this. He saw the simple clothes, the old furniture, the same worn dining table we used for years. He assumed that what he could see was all there was. But my husband and I knew something he did not. Behind that simple life was a quiet structure of protection. Over 40 years, we had put small amounts into retirement accounts, purchased a few low-cost properties to rent out, and kept an emergency fund that slowly grew. We did not talk about these things in detail with our son, not because we didn't trust him at first, but because we wanted him to learn to build his own life rather than wait for ours to end. Later, when my husband's health started to decline, we began to see stories on the news and hear stories at church about elderly people being taken advantage of by relatives, even their own children. We listened to widows who had lost control of their own money after trusting the wrong person. We heard about sons and daughters who took over accounts to help, then emptied them. Those stories changed how my husband thought. He arranged a meeting with a lawyer and a financial advisor. Together, they created a plan. Some accounts were visible, some were not. Some were in one name, some were in another structure altogether. My husband made sure that if anything happened to him, I would still have full control over the bulk of our savings, and no one, not even our son, could touch them without my clear, willing consent. We also installed a small security system when my husband became weaker. He wanted me to feel safe when home care nurses, helpers, or visitors came and went. Cameras were placed quietly in a few key areas, not to spy, but to protect. My husband knew he might not always be able to stand between me and harm in person, so he decided to leave protection in another form. I did not think our own child would be the one to test that protection, so when my son took my cards that day, I let him. I knew those were not the only keys to my future. When he carried my folder of visible accounts, I stayed still. I knew that folder did not show the entire picture. When he moved through the house with the confidence of someone who believed he now controlled everything, I remembered my husband's serious face in the lawyer's office and his words about making sure you're never at anyone's mercy, not even family. My son believed I was an easy target. He saw age and grief and assumed weakness. What he could not see, because he never took the time to really know us as people, only as providers, was the quiet strength my husband had left behind, the habits we built, the protections we set, the layers he never bothered to ask about. In that moment, I realized something very clearly. My husband had not only left me money, he had left me tools, he had left me proof. He had left me a way to defend myself without screaming, begging, or breaking. And while my son was busy taking what he thought mattered, he did not notice that every step he took that weekend was being recorded, stored, and prepared as evidence. My husband did not leave me unprotected, not even in death. After my son walked out that first day with my cards and my visible papers, the house felt even emptier than before. It was not just the silence of a missing husband anymore. It was the silence of a broken trust. I sat alone at the table and tried to process what had just happened. Part of me wanted to believe he would come back the next day, apologize, and say it was all a mistake. Another part of me, the part that had just watched his cold eyes and quick hands, knew better. Over the next 2 days, his behavior confirmed the truth. He began calling my banks, speaking to them as if he were my legal representative. I could hear his voice from the other room, firm and impatient, asking about balances and transfers, trying to change contact information. He spoke about me in the third person, as if I were an old, confused stranger instead of his mother sitting in the next room. He called the insurance company, asking direct questions about payouts from my husband's policy. There was no sadness in his tone, only urgency. He wanted to know what was coming and how soon. He moved through my financial life like he was cleaning out a storage unit, not handling the legacy of his parents. He also began talking about power of attorney, using phrases like, "She can't manage on her own now," and "I should be in control for her safety." He assumed my age and grief were proof that I could not be trusted with my own affairs. He made decisions in his mind without asking me. He spoke as if my future belonged to him by default. At the same time, he searched the house more thoroughly. He opened file boxes in the closet, looked through drawers that had nothing to do with money, and checked the small safe again. He did not find much more in those places because the most important things were not there. But watching him dig through my life like that told me one thing clearly. He was not trying to help me. He was trying to eliminate me, not physically, but practically. He wanted to be the one in charge of every decision. He wanted the accounts, the paperwork, the authority, and eventually, the house. He saw me as a burden and a gateway. As long as I was standing, he had to ask. If I became weak on paper, he wouldn't. He thought I was alone in the house when he made those calls. He thought no one else was paying attention when he took my things. He thought the cameras my husband installed were just there for show. He never asked about them, never wondered if they still worked, never thought they were anything more than little blinking lights. He was wrong. Every phone call he made from my living room was picked up by the small camera my husband had mounted in the corner when he first got sick. Every time he opened a drawer or took a file from my office, another camera caught it. Every time he spoke about me like I was a problem to manage, it was stored. He truly believed no one was watching, but someone was, not just me, sitting silently in my chair, someone else entirely, someone who would not let it slide. And as my son dug himself deeper into his plan, I watched, listened, and quietly gathered the strength my husband had left me for this exact kind of storm. Eventually, I knew I had to speak to him directly, not as a confused mother, but as a woman who saw what was happening. I did not want to shout. I did not want to break down. I wanted to understand what had turned my child into someone who could treat me like this. I wanted to hear the truth from his own mouth, even if it hurt. One afternoon, when he finished another phone call in the living room, I asked him to sit down across from me at the table. My hands were folded. My voice was steady. I told him I had noticed he was taking over my finances and making calls without including me. I said I had questions. I wanted to know why. He did not deny it. He did not soften. He did not show guilt. Instead, he rolled his shoulders back like he was tired of pretending. He said that I was getting old, that my life was comfortable enough, and that it was time for him to handle things. He made it clear he thought I did not need control anymore. He did not talk about making sure I was safe. He did not talk about protecting my interests. He talked about my life like it was a finished book and his like it was just beginning. He framed everything as if I was holding him back by simply existing with my own resources. Hearing that from my own child felt like another funeral. I had buried my husband on Friday. On Saturday and Sunday, I watched my son dismantle the trust I had in him. By that conversation, it felt like I was burying the image of the boy I thought I knew. He hinted that if I did not agree to let him continue, he could always look into having paperwork changed that would give him control anyway. He brought up care homes as an option normal for people my age. He made it clear that in his mind, I was on my way out of usefulness, and he was ready to take over whatever I left behind. He did not see me as a person with a full mind and a full heart. He saw me as a number, an obstacle between him and what he believed was his. Something inside me went cold and clear. I realized this was not just him being clumsy with grief or stressed about bills. This was who he chose to be in this moment. He chose greed over gratitude, control over compassion, power over love. In that moment, I understood that I had lost two things in 1 week. A husband who had loved and protected me, and a son who now saw me as something to control, not cherish. But I also understood something else. I did not have to surrender to this. I did not have to accept this as my new life. I had options my son did not know about, and there was someone else listening to all of this. Someone who cared more about my safety than my son did. After that conversation, I knew I could no longer wait and hope he would change. I needed to protect myself with the tools my husband had left behind. The first thing I did was call the only outsider who truly knew what had been going on in our home for months before my husband passed away. His home care nurse. She had been with us during the worst of his illness. She had seen our routines. She had seen my husband set up the cameras. She had access to the security app because he wanted someone we trusted to be able to check in if I ever didn't answer the phone. My son had forgotten all about her. He saw her as just another worker. But she was more than that. She was a quiet witness. When I spoke to her, her voice was shaken. She told me she had already been watching the camera feeds from time to time, just to make sure I was doing okay after the funeral. She had seen my son moving through the house, taking my cards, grabbing my documents, speaking about me like a burden. She had seen the way he behaved when he thought no one else was paying attention. She said she was horrified. She had already saved the footage. Every moment was recorded, every action, every word. My son had not just betrayed me, he had done it on camera. I contacted our lawyer next, the same one my husband had used for our estate planning. I told him everything. I told him about the removed cards, the bank calls, the threats about control and care homes. I told him about the cameras and the nurse and the saved recordings. He listened carefully and then explained my rights in clear terms. My son had no legal authority to seize my accounts, speak on my behalf, or make changes to my finances without my explicit permission. Any attempt to present himself as having that control could be challenged, blocked, and, if necessary, punished by law. We shifted quickly into protection mode. The lawyer helped me freeze and move what needed to be moved. We updated access methods. We changed passwords. We shifted contact numbers. We confirmed that any power of attorney on file was either non-existent or under my full control. He notified the banks that any requests from my son should be treated as suspicious unless I personally verified them. At the same time, the nurse sent the recordings to both me and the lawyer. In those videos, my son was clearly seen taking my wallet, cards, and documents. He was clearly heard speaking about my good life being over and about his plans to take charge. He was clearly caught calling institutions from my home, implying authority he did not have. The lawyer's reaction was simple. This was not a misunderstanding. This was attempted financial abuse of an elder. He suggested that we prepare for a confrontation, not an emotional one, a legal one. The plan formed quietly. The nurse agreed to be there. The lawyer arranged for 2 officers to be present, not as aggressors, but as witnesses and protectors. The recordings would be played. The truth would be laid out. And my son would be forced to face what he had done, not just in my eyes, but in front of people who could actually hold him accountable. As all of this came together, I felt something steady grow in me. Not joy, not revenge, but relief. Relief that I was not crazy. Relief that someone else had seen what I had seen. Relief that my husband's decision to install those cameras and set up those protections had not been pointless. He had looked ahead and prepared for the day I might be weak and someone might try to use that against me. He had been right. My son thought he was alone in the house when he took my life in his hands. He did not know his own father was still protecting me in the only way he could, through a lens, a file, and a plan. On Monday, my son came back to the house, expecting to continue what he had started. I could see it in his posture when he walked in. He carried a folder under his arm and had his phone in his hand, ready to make more calls. He did not knock. He did not greet me warmly. He walked in like he already owned the place. But this time, the house was different. He walked into the dining room and stopped. At the table sat myself, my husband's nurse, our lawyer, and 2 officers in plain clothes. The television on the wall was already on, paused at the start of a video. The look on his face shifted from confusion to concern to something close to fear. The lawyer calmly explained that we needed to talk about his recent actions. He said there was evidence we needed to review together. Then he pressed play on the video. On the screen, my son appeared, walking through this same house 2 days earlier. There he was, opening my purse, taking my wallet, removing my cards, going through my folders, speaking on the phone in the living room, declaring that my good life was over and that he was taking control. The sound was clear. The images were sharp. He watched himself act like I was no longer a person, just a problem to manage and a source of money to tap. His face turned pale. His hand went to his mouth. He tried to look away, but the footage kept going, showing scene after scene of him handling my private things without respect, speaking about me like I was useless. The nurse confirmed that she had seen everything live and had saved the recordings because she was worried about my safety. The lawyer explained that what my son had done was considered financial exploitation and attempted abuse. The officers sat quietly, listening, taking notes, watching my son instead of me. He tried at first to brush it off. He said he was only trying to help. He claimed he thought I wanted him to handle things. He blamed grief and stress and said he had not been thinking clearly. But the video did not support those excuses. The tone in his voice, the words he chose, the way he moved, none of it looked like a confused son trying to assist. It looked like someone seizing control on purpose. The lawyer laid out the options. Charges could be filed. A restraining order could be sought. His access to anything of mine could be completely cut off. The officers confirmed that elder financial abuse was serious and could carry real consequences. For the first time, my son looked small. All the confidence he had when taking my cards vanished. He was no longer the one in control. I sat there watching, my hands folded, my heart both heavy and strangely calm. This was not how I pictured things when my husband and I spoke about our old age. We imagined family dinners, shared holidays, and grandchildren running through the house. We did not imagine lawyers, recordings, and officers. But this was reality now. My son finally turned to me, eyes wet, trying to cry his way out of what he had done. But I could see the difference between sorrow and fear. He was not grieving what he had done to me. He was afraid of what might happen to him now that he had been caught. He had not expected evidence. He had not expected witnesses. He had not expected that his own father's planning would corner him like this. He had come expecting a broken old woman. Instead, he found truth waiting for him at the table. Once the footage ended and the reality settled in, my son started to shift his behavior. He went from defensive to desperate. He said he was sorry, that he didn't mean it, that it all came from stress about money and grief over his father. He said he was overwhelmed, that he panicked, that he thought he was doing what was necessary. But the lawyer and the officers had heard those words before, from many people in similar situations. They explained that while emotions were understandable, actions still had consequences. Taking someone's cards, trying to control their accounts, and speaking to banks as if he had legal authority were not small mistakes. They were serious. The lawyer turned to me and made it clear that the next step was my decision. I could choose to press charges formally or choose a different route as long as protections were put in place to keep this from happening again. As I looked at my son, I studied his face. I tried to see if there was true remorse or just fear of punishment. He avoided my eyes when they talked about consequences, but he became very focused when the lawyer mentioned frozen access and blocked attempts to control my finances. When he realized he might never have any say in my affairs again, his tone changed. He stopped talking about guilt and started talking about what he thought he deserved. He said he was an only child, that one day everything would be his anyway, and that it was normal for children to step in early. There it was. He was not sorry for how he had treated me. He was upset about being stopped. I decided then that I needed both boundaries and protection, not revenge. I chose to have everything tightened legally, new powers of attorney that did not include him, notifications to every bank and agency that no one could speak on my behalf without a specific password and direct confirmation. The lawyer arranged for my son to sign documents acknowledging he had no authority over my accounts, property, or medical decisions. The officers made it clear that if he crossed that line again, charges would follow quickly. My son signed those papers, but his face showed more anger than regret. He left the house that day frustrated, not humbled. He did not stay to check on me. He did not ask if I needed groceries. He did not sit for a moment beside the chair where his father used to be. He stormed out, upset that his plan had failed. That told me everything I needed to know. He had not chosen family. He had chosen greed. And when greed was blocked, he did not choose love. He chose distance. It hurt, but it also cleared the fog. I stopped waiting for the son I remembered to come back. I accepted who he had become, and once I did that, I could finally decide what was best for my own future, without feeling guilty for protecting myself. After that confrontation, my life changed again, but this time, in a way that gave me back some control. With my lawyer's help, I secured all my accounts. I changed passwords, updated contact information, and added extra security measures. I set up automatic protections so that any unusual activity would alert both me and my lawyer. I also moved some things into simpler arrangements so I wouldn't need help to manage day-to-day tasks. I decided not to stay in the same house where all of this had happened. The walls held too many echoes, my husband's last days, my son's cold footsteps, the sound of my own heart breaking. I sold the property on my own terms, with guidance, not pressure. I chose a smaller place in a quiet senior community where neighbors look out for each other, where people greet each other by name, and where I can walk outside without feeling watched by the wrong eyes. I took with me the things that mattered most: photos, letters, small items that held memories of my husband. The money we had saved stayed under my control. I used some of it to make my new home comfortable and safe. I set aside funds for my own care in the future so no one could ever claim they were forced to step in. I even made a few careful donations to causes my husband cared about, in his honor, in my own time, without anyone rushing me. My relationship with my son did not recover. He called a few times, mostly to test if anything had changed with my boundaries. When he realized the protections were still in place, the calls faded. There were no visits to simply check on my health. There were no holidays together. I grieved that loss almost as much as I grieved my husband. But over time, my grief shifted into something else: acceptance and wisdom. I realized that blood does not guarantee loyalty. A last name does not guarantee love. Being a parent does not automatically mean your child will choose to honor you when they see an opportunity to benefit from your weakness. At the same time, I saw something deeper. My husband's love did not end when his heart stopped. He had prepared for this. He had left me safety, not just money. He had left me proof, not just memories. He had left me a way to stand up for myself when I felt most alone. I also learned that I am stronger than I thought. I learned that age does not mean helplessness. I learned that being quiet does not mean being blind. I learned that I am allowed to protect what I built, even from the people I once expected to protect me. Now, when I sit at my new table with my cup of tea, I feel peace. I still miss my husband. I still remember the son I raised before greed took hold. But I am no longer afraid of being controlled or used. I have boundaries, protection, and a life I chose for myself. To any woman listening who has lost a husband and is afraid of what comes next, I want to say this clearly. You are not done because you are older. You are not in the way because you need time. You are not selfish for protecting what you and your husband built. My husband left me love and security. My son left me a hard lesson. Both changed me, but only one of them still guides my days.